Hey, so I'm Nico Josi and I'm back with more Orre Colosseum content. The Orre Colosseum format just released its third edition of the Viability Rankings. As you can see, we have all the tiers from S plus to C minus listed right here and all the mons that are in it. So this is a list of all the mons that you can use to a certain degree of effectiveness in our format, which once again is like Gen 3 VGC is what we play. And this is the final result of all the votes that came in from the best players of the format. And we're gonna go over it right now. So we're gonna start with S plus tier. First, I want to say my personal votes, I voted all the mons that are in an S tier into the same tier. For me, this is one S tier, but I can see that the community disagrees with my take. Some people do think that Snorlax deserves to be 2 tiers below Metagross. And right now, I want to try to explain, even if I disagree with that, I want to try to explain why people see it that way. So first of all, the cornerstone of the format, Metagross. Metagross is the best physical attacker in the format, and it is the best explosion resisting mon in the format, and also arguably the best user of explosion. It has clear body to keep it safe from intimidate, which is huge. It has meteor mash, which is an amazing stab move to have. Because it is resisted by very few mons, you can spam it very nicely and you will always do a lot of damage because of this high base power of 100. Metagross with a choice band on it is one of the strongest mons that you can have. I don't see it as very reliable with a choice band. I like it when it can protect. But it's an option, and it's a very scary option. Metagross's speed tier is also something that does make it so effective. Its speed tier is base 70, which doesn't seem very fast, and it is indeed not the fastest mon. It is quite very average. It is basically like the definition of average speed. But what this means is that you basically outspeed all the slow mons. You have your Snorlaxes, Swamperts, Marowaks, Tyrannitars, all of Regis, all the Regis. All of these mons are significantly slower than Metagross, so most of the time you don't have to worry about outspeeding them. You can go bulky very comfortably and still always win those speed races against something important like a Snorlax. So that's huge. Metagross doesn't really have a real weakness. That's one of the big things about it. It is so reliable because it is very, very hard to knock it out in one hit. In order to knock it out before it can move, knock it out in one hit, you have to use a fire type move. Technically, you could use a choice band Flygon, for example, or any kind of choice banded ground type. However, these mons are not very viable for several reasons. The most viable mons that can OHKO Metagross before it can move are fire types, such as Arcanine, Moltres, or Charizard. But besides that, you have to double up into it, and even then a double up might not always KO it. And yes, that is the reason why Metagross is so reliable. It will spread damage across the board. It always threatens an explosion. It is not super slow like Snorlax, where you can always double target it. Sometimes only one of your mons will outspeed it, because there's also always Metagross wars. So that's also something important. Your Metagross wants to outspeed other Metagrosses. But then you also maybe end up being too frail. So that's also something you have to keep in mind. So yeah, Metagross is what this format really gravitates around the most. And it makes total sense to be at the top of this format. It is, yeah. With Explosion, it always puts on pressure. No matter if you have steel resists, like steel and ground resists like Zapdos, or or Gyarados or Moltres. All of these mons will always be threatened by explosion. So it literally threatens every mon in this format. And its attack cannot be lowered thanks to Clear Body. Then it even has some utility options which have seen basically no play. However, it has Icy Wind, it has Light Screen, it has Reflect. So there's a ton of things you could do with Metagross. It is definitely one of the most versatile mons. Not the most versatile, but definitely has a lot of utility and versatility, besides just its raw power. After that, in the list, in S+, the only other S+ tier we have is Latias. Both of the Latias are almost identical in viability, in my opinion. I rank them right next to each other, but I do agree that Latias is just a tiny bit more viable than Latios. And that is because Latias is so versatile. It has the bulk to really take advantage of a support set with Thunder Wave or Screens or even Icy Wind. But it also has the power to just go offensive. So if you want to only go offensive, usually you will go with Latios because you want to take advantage of that 130 base special attack. However, if you want to go, for example, 2 attacks and 1 supporting move like Helping Hand or Thunder Wave, or even 1 attack, which usually then is Dragon Claw because it has such awesome just coverage. It's just a good move to have as your single coverage move because the only thing that resists it is Steel. And then, so if you have Dragon Claw plus 2 supporting moves, then you always want to go for Latias. Because it has such great bulk, it can stay on the field for so long. The answers that you commonly see for Latios, such as Tauros with Double Edge, will not be a surefire way of killing Latias. They're not as effective against Latias. So Latias is much harder to have very clear answers into, which means you have to play around it with more thought in your mind than against Latios. Which is why for me it makes sense that Latias is above its brother Latios. And so I've talked about Latios, so let's get into the S tier, which first of all it's Latios, so it makes sense. It comes right after Latias. Once again, they are very close in viability. Both have the same typing and very similar stats. But Latios is much stronger, and they have the same speed of 110. And Latios is probably the best special attacker in the format. And for that reason, it is almost on every team which doesn't have Latias. And what it wants to do is just get off these big hits. It has great coverage, just like Latias, with Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Dragon Claw, Psychic. You even have Waterfall if you want it, for example, for Arcanine, Houndoom, or even something like Rhydon. And you can even go with Thunder for Rain teams, or even Solar Beam for Sun teams. And then you see occasionally Hidden Power Fire on either Latias or Latios. The drawback of Hidden Power Fire is that you become slower than other 110 base speed mons like Tauros and other Latis and Gengar. So that's something you have to play with carefully. After Latios we have Zapdos, which after the Latis is the second strongest special attacker, the second most viable special attacker in the format. Zapdos' Thunderbolt is among the really viable mons. It is the strongest special attack bar none. It has awesome power with Thunderbolt and very few mons resist it. The Latis are actually one big reason why you use the Latis is because they have such good defensive typings where they resist water, electric, fire, grass, all these types. So very often you will put a Lati on your team just because you don't have an electric resist and you don't want to lose to Zapdos. Or something like Swampert is very important because it has a great Zapdos matchup. It doesn't take damage from Thunderbolt. And Marowak also often really shines because of the way it shuts down Zapdos, not allowing it to get off Thunderbolts. Besides the attacks, so usually Zapdos runs Thunderbolt and Hidden Power, either most of the time it's Ice to hit the Latias, or Grass for Swampert. Then you have the option of going Drill Peck if you really hate Heracross. This is what I did with my team that won OCX. Even though I didn't need Drill Peck, but it was still nice to have it just for Heracross. And most of the time people will go with one utility move, such as Substitute, which helps you against explosions, which means you don't have to rely on Protect or Detect to protect yourself from an explosion. You can use a Substitute instead. This is also very potent with Latios. Or it can even go for Thunder Wave, Light Screen, or hell, Rain Dance, who knows. So yeah, Zapdos doesn't have the most options, but what it has really puts in work. Like, it's such an effective special attacker, and what really gives it such an important place in this format is that it is the best Metagross check. It resists Meteor Mash and is immune to Earthquake, which means it has a great matchup, and most of the time it threatens the 2-hit KO on Metagross with its Thunderbolt. Next up is Snorlax, still an S tier, but this time it's an S-. A lot of people say they don't really like Snorlax, they don't like playing Snorlax. They don't know how to use it effectively because everybody talks about how good it is, but then some people they just feel like they don't see how it is actually that good. And I understand where that comes from. For me at the beginning, Snorlax was kind of weird because I needed it as a special wall against these strong special attackers that we talked about before. That is its main job. It's there to patch up this weakness to special attackers that a lot of teams will have. It's there to be a wall that can dish out damage. However, once you get hit by Intimidates or just the raw power that it has, sometimes it's not enough. And that's what makes people think that it's not that good. What I like to do is I like to use Choice Band Snorlax, which is extremely powerful, where it gets to the point where it does have enough power to pick up one-hit KOs on something like Zapdos or Latios with a return, for example. But even if you don't use Choice Band, you always have the threat of Self-Destruct, which is the strongest boom in this format thanks to the stab normal that Snorlax gets on the move. And it kills everything, and that's why Snorlax is so scary to go up against. You're always worried that at any moment, if you don't take out their Snorlax, they're gonna self-destruct. And if you're careless, if you don't protect your mons, but you also don't take out Snorlax, you might just lose the game right there. So in the same vein that Metagross always threatens the explosion, Snorlax always threatens the self-destruct. And even though it's slower than Metagross, what it does have over it is that it's much harder to take out fast. Metagross can be OHKO'd, Snorlax basically cannot get OHKO'd unless you're facing a Choice Band fighting type like Medicham. But that's not really good. Like, most of the time nothing can OHKO Snorlax. The only mon that doesn't need a Choice Band to OHKO Snorlax is Machamp, which has seen almost no usage. And that's the one thing Machamp has got going for it. It can low kick Snorlax and almost always pick up the one-hit KO. So that's it for the S tier. Next up, let's get into the A tiers. First of all, we have the A+ tier. This is exactly the same as I voted for it. We have Tauros, Starmie, Swampert and Gengar. All of these four, I think, are very close to each other in viability. You could say they're pretty much equals in my eyes. Although maybe I would like to see Gengar either in first place or in second place after Tauros, but I digress. It's not such an important distinction, it's a minor detail. So first up there's Tauros. And Tauros is the strongest or the best Choice Band user in the format, thanks to its high speed. It speed ties the Latias, it speed ties Gengar. So these four mons, Latias, Latios, Tauros and Gengar, they form the most important speed tier in the format, which is the 110 speed tier. Thanks to this speed tie, Tauros is the most effective mon at outspeeding other Latias, or in this case it's more about Latios, outspeeding Latios, or you could say winning the speed tie, and OHKOing it with a choice band double edge, which is a 87.5% chance. So that's not even guaranteed against a Latios with no bulk at all. But even that shows how strong the Latias are and how much you have to fear them, that that Tauros is the strongest option against them. That's how few options there are to effectively deal with them. So that's basically Tauros's role in the format. It is there to threaten fast mons with an even faster move. So fast frail mons with a fast double edge, pick up big KOs, clean up the opponent's team after you dealt some chip damage with your other mons, or just come in and intimidate. Since it is the most viable Intimidate user, you can say it's the best user of Intimidate, and that is something you should definitely not underestimate. Intimidate can really help pull out the teeth of some really scary mons, like I said, of Snorlax or of Marowak, for example. I actually, in my finals match of OCX, I won in big part thanks to Tauros's Intimidate, rendering the opponent's Marowak unable to 2-hit KO my Tyranitar. So that was really important. And even though Tauros is mainly there to deal damage, you can also use it for utility with its Intimidate. Next up, Starmie. Starmie is the most important mon at outspeeding the 110s. With its 115 base speed, it outspeeds the Latias, Tauros, Gengar, and it can OHKO Gengar and 2-hit KO the Latias and Tauros. And it can, with a helping hand boost to its Hydro Pump, it can even 1-hit KO Tauros, which is huge and which is sometimes an emergency way to deal with Tauros because of how scary it can be for some teams. So Starmie has that going for it. Very fast and very big damage. It also has great coverage, just like the Latias. So what you often see is Hydro Pump, Ice Beam and Psychic for Gengar. But you can even go utility, and Starmie can do that very well also. It can also go for screens, Thunder Wave, Icy Wind. The problem there is always you have to pick and choose which coverage moves do you want. Like, oftentimes you're gonna drop Thunderbolt, even though that's also nice to have. So what I like to do is usually go for Hydro Pump and Ice Beam. Usually I'm not that scared of Gengar. If I'm really scared of Gengar, I'll definitely run Psychic on Starmie, because Psychic on Starmie makes it the best answer into Gengar, because it's such a good mon, but it also outspeeds Gengar and can reliably OHKO Gengar. And it also has skill swap, so I've used some skill swap teams with Starmie where I just ran Hydro Pump and Ice Beam and then skill swap, and then Protect, which is on almost every mon in this format. You should just consider Protect a given on basically any mon. Up next we have Swampert. And Swampert is a great mon because it has another very good Metagross matchup. Metagross can hit it with an Earthquake, but it doesn't 2-hit KO. And Swampert can 2-hit KO in return with its strong Earthquake. It also has a very strong Hydro Pump that can deal huge damage once it's in Torrent range. And it's just very good into the Latias as well. If you have Ice Beam, you're gonna win that 1v1 versus the Latias most of the time. And with leftovers, it has so much survivability. And you always need Protect to protect yourself from explosions, because Swampert is one of the main targets of something like an explosion, which can just take it out very swiftly, because otherwise Swampert is very hard to take out for a lot of teams. When mons run HP Grass, such as Zapdos running HP Grass, that's basically for Swampert. That's how good Swampert is. It really demands that respect, that either you have a quick way to deal with it, like HP Grass, or you're gonna play the long game and you're gonna have to respect the Swampert a lot. And what it also likes to do is Icy Wind. So just spam Icy Wind, make sure that your team is faster than the opponent's team. That's something that it's very good at also. So it's the best water type besides Starmie because of its Zapdos immunity to Zapdos' Thunderbolt. Other waters, as we will see later, struggle a lot in this format because of Zapdos, because of how Zapdos is on pretty much every team in order to deal with Metagross. So yeah, that's why Swampert is great, thanks to its ground typing and the stab EQ that goes with it. After that we have Gengar. And Gengar, for me, Gengar is the mascot of this format. It's such a cool mon and very cute and always with a happy smile on its face. And you know, it's always planning some mischief. And this is exactly how you feel when you go up against it. When you play close team sheets and you don't know which moves it runs, you're always scared of the explosion. Even though Gengar's base attack is only 65, its explosion will put in the damage that it needs to. It can pick up one-hit KOs if you invest into its attack. So it's actually its attack stat, it can make it work pretty nicely with explosion. And why Gengar is so viable is because it is immune to others' explosions, and it is also immune to Earthquake. So besides Misdreavus, it is the only mon that boasts these two immunities to these two most important attacks in the format. And of course, don't underestimate Gengar's damage output. It has the same base special attack as Latios. Even if it has no stab, its Thunderbolt, its Ice Punch, and its Fire Punch, it's gonna pick up nice 2-hit KOs on pretty much everything that's weak to those moves, such as Metagross, for example. It can 2-hit KO pretty much all Metagross with its Fire Punch. And then Gengar is very scary because it has thousands of utility options. Like it is maybe the most versatile mon with Latias, because it can go for skill swap Levitate, which can enable some crazy strategies like Metagross, Levitate Metagross or Levitate Raikou, which can become almost impossible to take out at some point. It also has Perish Song for Perish teams. It has Destiny Bond. It has Will-O-Wisp, which also sees a lot of use. So yeah, there are a thousand ways that you can run Gengar, and you can put it on pretty much any team. However, its flaw is that it is frail. It's gonna die to a Meteor Mash from a max attack Metagross, which doesn't even need a choice band to pick up that one-hit KO. And it is threatened by all these psychics in the format, from Latias, Latios, and Starmie, or even Alakazam. And a lot of mons also have Shadow Ball, like Snorlax. However, sometimes certain mons don't have the coverage they need for it, because oftentimes, for example, when you run Shadow Ball on Snorlax, you're only running it for Gengar. And so a lot of people, they will drop Shadow Ball because they're not that scared of Gengar. So in that case, Gengar can become very annoying because sometimes the opponent just doesn't have great ways to deal with it, and certain mons are just completely walled by it. So that's great. If you use Gengar, you can really put your opponent into very awkward spots, where, for example, they will have to switch out their Tauros because they're locked into the wrong move. Alright, this was the A+ tier. Next up we have the A tier, and first in line is Arcanine. That rhyme wasn't even on purpose. So Arcanine is the second best Intimidate user in the format. And why it's such a great... So it is an awesome Intimidate user. When you use Arcanine, you're mainly using it for Intimidate, because not only does it intimidate physical attackers, but also the one physical attacker that doesn't care about Intimidate. Well, the most important physical attacker with clear body is Metagross. But Metagross dies to its Overheat or Fire Blast. So that's something great about Arcanine. You can have an answer into pretty much every physical attacker, because on one hand you have Intimidate, and on the other hand you have fire moves that will OHKO Metagross before it can move. And then Arcanine has a great tool in Helping Hand, which allows for big KOs, as I said, for example, Starmie OHKOing the Tauros, or even, it also has Extreme Speed, which can be huge when dealing with something like an Endure Mon, or just to pick up frail Mons when they're low on HP. And it can even break some substitutes, for example, of a Latios. So even though Arcanine doesn't have a lot of tools, it has just enough to be perfectly viable and a great mon to use. It is fun. You do have to be careful around earthquakes, and finding the right EV spread is something that's very hard with Arcanine, because you kind of need all of its stats. You need its speed to outspeed Metagross, you need its special attack to deal damage with its fire stab. You want to be defensive so you don't die to an earthquake, or you can take, for example, 2 psychics. And then a lot of the time, if you're running extreme speed, you want also to deal some damage with extreme speed, so you want a good attack stat. So some people have tried to circumvent this problem and just not go for extreme speed and just go for some coverage like Crunch, which is good against Latias, or HP Grass for Swampert, or just run all 3 and no Helping Hand. So yeah, there's been a lot of development with Arcanine recently, and I'm really curious about seeing which set will turn out to be like the most consistent. Next up, after Arcanine, we have Marowak. Marowak is the greatest user of Lightning Rod. It redirects all electric type moves like Thunderbolt and also Thunder Wave, which is huge. Stopping your opponent from paralyzing your team is so amazing, and it can be really a pain to deal with. If your team relies on spreading Thunder Wave, then Marowak can be so hard to deal with, and can be such a problem to many teams. And of course it has the thick club, which means you get basically an extra item. Like you only need to choose 5 of the Gen 3 items, which are very hard to choose from because there aren't that many viable items in Gen 3. So having thick club on it means you free up an item slot, which also shouldn't be underestimated. So yeah, and with the thick club it hits very hard. It is the strongest non-choice band physical attacker. Its earthquake deals huge damage, and it even has Bone Meringue, which is a great move if you don't want to target your ally with earthquake. Besides that, it even has Perish Song, which sometimes sees use. Second place in OCX had a Perish Trap team with Perish Song Marowak, and it makes a lot of sense. It can redirect moves from something like Politoed. So yeah, Marowak is a great team player, but the weakness of Marowak is that it is very slow. It is one of the slowest mons besides something like Snorlax. And also it is pretty weak to Hydro Pumps. It really has to invest a lot into its special defense in order to live Hydro Pumps. So you can't really take advantage of this huge attack stat because you have to make it really bulky at the same time to be able to stick around on the field for long enough to support your team enough to win the game. But yeah, it's still an awesome mon, and it belongs very rightly so into the A tier. Last one in the A tier is Raikou. Raikou is another mon that outspeeds the main fast threats. So it is the same speed tier as Starmie, and it also takes advantage of the great damaging option that is Thunderbolt. And it also has a great move in Crunch to deal with the Latias. It can go for scary Calm Mind setups. It can go, as I said, you can go for Levitate on Raikou plus the Calm Mind setup and basically become an endgame win con, a special wall that also deals huge damage back. It is great at using Substitute, and it can even use Thunder Wave, because a fast Thunder Wave will go before your opponent can set up a Substitute to protect themselves. So yeah, Raikou, great Mon. Really, it's kind of straightforward. It's a fast special attacker. Do not underestimate it. It's very fun to use. Next, we have the A- tier, and it is led by Tyranitar. And Tyranitar used to be much lower on this tier list. I think in version 1 or 2 it was maybe B- tier or B tier. Now it rightly got into the A- tier, where it definitely belongs, because what is nice about Tyranitar is, first of all, it is an explosion resist, so it is another very bulky mon that lets you play more comfortably into opposing teams that want to abuse explosion. It will not take that much damage. And it also has Sandstorm, which is unique about it. It can set up the weather for an eternity. The weather will not run out. So it sets up the Sandstorm, and it will deal chip damage over time, which can let you pick up KOs on a lot of mons in the format. You should definitely check out my team report of my OCX team, which won the tournament, because that was a Sand team, that was a Tyranitar team, and I go very much in depth about how I use Tyranitar to such great effect. And yeah, you should check it out if you want to learn how to use Tyranitar effectively. Because Tyranitar is a little bit hard to use. There are certain moves in this format, like Meteor Mash or Hydro Pumps or Brick Breaks, that threaten it very hard. If you don't invest in its bulk, it's gonna die to a Meteor Mash a lot of the time. So that's something you have to keep in mind when using Tyranitar. It's not very easy to use, and you also have to make sure that the Sand doesn't hurt your own team as much as it hurts the opponent. But yeah, once again, the Sand is also just a great assurance to have against something like Shedinja or Endure Mons, for example, or just to be able to switch in when the opponent set up a Rain or Sun to disrupt their weather. So yeah, it's a great ability, and Tyranitar also has great options in Thunder Wave and Rock Slide to go for Paraflinch, and it has the great move Crunch, which deals significant damage into the Latias, and is just an overall great move to spam in this format. Next up we have Gyarados. And Gyarados is the third Intimidator in this viability ranking. It is another Metagross check because it resists Meteor Mash and is also immune to Earthquake. It can go for Dragon Dance setup with a Marowak next to its side, which can be very scary. However, it is stopped by Zapdos, which is a problem for it, which means Dragon Dance is never really the most consistent option on it, but it's probably the best option. But what you can also do with Gyarados is really invest in its bulk and make it really bulky, especially on the special side, which, then with Intimidate you're bulky on both sides. And it can go for support moves like Icy Wind, Thunder Wave, and even Leer, which I have used to let my Marowak pick up KOs on something like Swampert, just deal huge damage across the board. So yeah, that's Gyarados. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of attacking options. You usually only have Earthquake or Hidden Power, or you can use a normal type like Double Edge or Return, but that's it. That's all it has. So yeah, it's a bit hard to really sweep teams with it, but it definitely puts in work on the right team. But usually, if you use Gyarados, you want to run some Lightning Rod support to really bring out the most that Gyarados can bring to a team. Then after that is Ludicolo, which is the very first Fake Out user in this list. So Ludicolo confirmed Fake Out, best Fake Out user. And what makes Ludicolo great is it has another awesome Metagross matchup. So you're gonna see this is a recurring theme in this format. A Pokemon is gonna be either very good or very bad, simply because of its Metagross matchup. So it resists both Meteor Mash and Earthquake. And it can 2-hit KO Metagrosses, max HP Metagross with Hydro Pump. And then it can also go for grass moves to deal with Swampert. It has Ice Beam, of course. It can go for Icy Wind. And most importantly, it is a staple on Rain teams, obviously, because it can fake out the opponent while you set up Rain with the other Mon. And then it can outspeed everything and go for big Hydro Pumps. So that's Ludicolo. Yeah, it's a great Mon. You don't have to use it in Rain. You can just use it as a standalone Mon. If you, for example, if you want an assurance against Rain teams, you can put Ludicolo on your team and you're not going to need the Rain, but if you go up against Rain, it's going to be amazing. So this was all the A tiers, and now we go into the B tiers. First up, B+, and at the beginning of B+, we have Medicham. Medicham is the second fake-out user in this list, and it is another great fake-out user because it deals damage with fake-out because of how strong it is. Wider Medicham is a great set because you don't care about Intimidate the first time. And after it fakes out the opponent, it can then go for big damage with Brick Break and Shadow Ball. That's really it. You can, for example, fake out a Latios and then pick up the guaranteed KO with Shadow Ball the next turn, and you're not really threatened to be one-hit KO'd because you don't really have many weaknesses on Medicham. So even though it's frail, it's usually gonna live one hit and deal big damage in return. And you can even go for Endure strats, which have been nowhere near as common recently, but if you do manage to set up a Salac Medicham with Reversal, then that's almost game over for your opponent. That's very scary to go up against. After that we have Suicune. So it is the first mono water type, and it is probably the best mono water type. But the reason it doesn't go higher than B+ is because of Zapdos. It is very scared of Zapdos because Zapdos can basically turn its bulk irrelevant with one Thunderbolt, after which you can probably pick up the KO with an Earthquake. But Suicune can go for Calm Mind setup, or it can spam Icy Wind. Those are basically the two roles that it has. Either support with Icy Wind or go for the setup with Calm Mind and deal damage yourself with Hydro Pump and Ice Beam. Pretty straightforward. It can also use Rest, but overall it's hard to use because of Zapdos, and it hasn't seen a lot of usage. After Suicune we have Moltres. Moltres, another, maybe the best Metagross check because of the Earthquake immunity and also the possibility to one-hit KO Metagross with a fire move. So that is its claim to fame, dealing with Metagross. But what it also has is Will-O-Wisp, which is huge for something like Snorlax, which it otherwise cannot touch. But with Will-O-Wisp, it can actually win the 1v1 versus Snorlax if you play it right. And then the problem with Moltres is usually then the only coverage option you have is Hidden Power. And something you maybe want to go for is Hidden Power Grass into Swampert, but then you don't have an option for the Latias, so you're not going to deal much damage into them. Just in general, that matchup is hard, and also the Zapdos matchup is hard. So just like Suicune, Moltres cannot go higher than B+ because of its very bad Zapdos matchup, which usually it cannot take a Thunderbolt. And then talking about bad matchups, maybe the real incarnation of a bad matchup is Regice, because Regice in my eyes is an amazing Pokemon. It is great at dealing with the Latias and Zapdos, picking up one-hit KOs on Latios and Zapdos with a Nevermelt Ice Beam. It's just a great special wall, but it has such a bad Metagross matchup. Like Metagross will one-hit KO with a Meteor Mash. You need to invest, besides going max HP, you need to invest a lot in its defense to live a Meteor Mash, which is not really worth it because you want to deal damage with Ice Beam and even with Icy Wind, with which it can deal quite a lot of damage. And it also has Explosion, which is nice. However, of course, its attack stat is low, so you're not gonna pick up a lot of KOs with Explosion, but if you just invest a little bit of attack, then for example you can pick up a KO and Starmie with Explosion, which is nice. And it also has great coverage with both Ice Beam and Thunderbolt. So yeah, don't underestimate Regice, it can be huge into certain teams. Just if you use Regice, make sure you have a Metagross answer. Then after that we have Heracross, and Heracross, coming from the bad matchups, now we go to a awesome matchup, which is Heracross into the Latias. So you might think, oh, but they threaten Heracross with a Psychic. Well, actually Heracross can go max HP, and then it basically lives a timid Latios Psychic, which is great, and it will always pick up the one-hit KO into either Lati with a Mega Horn. So Mega Horn is such a great tool because of this immense base power that this move has, which means Heracross does not need a choice band. Heracross can be very flexible and does have this one big attack with which to just nuke the Starmies off the field. The Latis, not the Starmies. Of course Starmie too. And what you can, for example, also do is you can go for Swagger into your Heracross and then pick up the one-hit KO on a Metagross with Earthquake. So yeah, Heracross is just great because it's a wall breaker, it deals a lot of damage to a lot of mons. And unless you have a flying type, unless you have a flying attack, you're usually not gonna one-hit KO Heracross because it has just enough bulk. It is in a very perfect sweet spot of just enough speed, just enough bulk, and then great attack. After Heracross we have Clefable, and Clefable is the best user of Follow Me. It is quite bulky if you invest into its defenses. It goes for Follow Me, it wants to use Protect to protect itself from explosions, then usually Soft Boil to keep itself alive and just keep on staying on the field and redirecting every move. And since it doesn't have any weaknesses besides fighting, which is not a very common attacking type in this format, that means it can take a lot of hits with Follow Me. And then usually the last move, it kind of depends what you want to do. You can, for example, you can support your team with Icy Wind, you can go for decent damage across the board with Seismic Toss, or maybe you can go for something like Fire Blast to deal good damage into Metagross. But yeah, the problem with Clefable in the end is that it is kind of passive, and if you get rid of its partners, or you're gonna get rid of it sooner or later, and can it really do enough for your team to be worth it to put on your team? If you have certain setup though, like Ninjask for example, then you definitely want to use Clefable, because it's the only mon that can really enable certain setup strategies like Ninjask or even Belly Drum Charizard. After Clefable we have Kingdra. Some people might think, oh, Kingdra is amazing, why isn't it higher? Very easy answer, the Latias. They are great into rain because they resist water and they don't take that much damage from an Ice Beam, and they just deal huge damage in return with Dragon Claw. So Dragon Claw is not intended for Kingdra, it is intended to hit other Latias, but Kingdra does get caught in the middle and just suffers from that, and its viability kind of tanks because of this poor Lati matchup. But if you do set up the rain, it hits like a truck, it outspeeds everything, and just in general it is a bulky mon that has no weakness besides Dragon, so almost no weaknesses. So yeah, Kingdra, great mon, but not gonna make it higher than B+. But if you use Rain, then Kingdra is probably gonna be your first choice for a Rain Sweeper. And last one in the B+ tier is Alakazam. I have used Alakazam a lot in the past. I used to think of it more highly, I used to rank it in the A- tier, but now I do think that it belongs more in B+. It is more a B tier mon than an A tier mon. It is very fast, it even outspeeds Starmie and Raikou. and it has great damage with Psychic or Fire Punch or Ice Punch. And then usually it runs Encore because it is actually the fastest user of Encore, and with so many protects in this format you can Encore your opponent into using Protect and render their Mon useless for up to like 6 turns. Like Encore is busted in Gen 3. And you definitely need to protect yourself on Alakazam, like Endure or Protect. What Alakazam also has is Inner Focus, which is nice, so you cannot fake it out, or you cannot flinch it with Fake Out. But yeah, the problem with Alakazam is on one hand, it is super frail. I mean, this is no news. Alakazam is gonna die to almost any big physical hit. Yeah, it's gonna die to any big physical hit. Even if it sets up a Reflect, I think it can still die to a Meteor Mash, for example. And it, besides being frail, it has a bad case of 4 move slot syndrome. And the problem is you cannot really have coverage for everything because you want Encore and you want Psychic, because another thing it can do is outspeed Gengar and KO it with Psychic. And then you have to choose between Ice Punch for the Latias or Fire Punch for Metagross. Both of those matchups are really bad if you do not have this move. But yeah, it has to choose, and still it can put in a lot of work. And I want to go back to using it more, because I do think we still have to explore it more, especially the use of Encore. Alright, after B+, we get into the biggest tier in this viability ranking. And in my opinion, this is a little bit too big. I do think there shouldn't be this many Mons. Like, this tier has so many Mons that one idea that I had was to actually build a team with only B tier Mons. So I'm gonna do this right after the viability rankings. But yeah, let's go through all of these Mons. So first in B tier we have Regirock. In my opinion, Regirock definitely deserves to be higher, but still not a lot of people have used it. What it has going for it is super defensively bulky, and if you invest into its special defense, it is so hard to take it out. It basically cannot be taken out with one hit. And it is the best explosion resist besides ghost types. It takes so little damage even from EQs. It can comfortably live a Meteor Mash. I'm pretty sure with lefties and the right investment you can even live 2 Meteor Mashes, which is incredible. And it has also clear body, so it also doesn't care about Intimidate. And it has Explosion to deal huge damage. It even has Superpower, which I honestly doesn't see that much use, but it's nice for like Snorlax or Tyranitar. It also has Earthquake itself. It can go for Curse, or it can be support with Thunder Wave. Yeah, mostly Thunder Wave. The problem is that it doesn't really have a strong Rock Stab, and that's a problem with pretty much every Rock type in this format. You don't really have a good option for dealing huge damage with a Rock type move. So usually you have to go for Hidden Power Rock, because Rock Slide has such reduced damage in Gen 3, it only deals 50% for spread damage. So Rock Slide is too weak in this format to deal enough damage. Which means, yeah, you have to go for HP Rock, but that's not the strongest move, so that's kind of where Regirock is lacking. And then also Rock type is not the best defensively, so you get hit super effectively by a lot, like as I said, Earthquakes, Meteor Mashes and Hydro Pumps. But however, because it resists Explosion, Rock type is still pretty great in this format. But yeah, I think more people need to use Regirock to really see how good it is. But for now, I understand that it's in the B tier because it is slow, and sometimes it will not do enough damage to really pull its weight. Next up is Kangaskhan, the third Fake Out user, and well, not according to this viability ranking because Clefable goes before it, but some people would argue it is the third best normal type after Snorlax and Tauros. It is another option if you want a normal type with like a strong double edge on your team that can be more supportive with Fake Out, with Icy Wind, or maybe Body Slam. So yeah, it's great because it is very bulky but also pretty strong and just great support with Fake Out. Yeah, you can definitely use it at the highest level in this format. Next up is Dusclops. Dusclops is the bulkiest ghost type, so it is one of the best mons to have into Explosion. The thing that is very scary about Dusclops is that it can go for Imprison, so it can imprison your Protect and Substitute, and then its partner goes for Explosions and you cannot protect against that anymore. That is something that Dusclops likes to do, but it can also go for other options like Will-O-Wisp, Nightshade, and Helping Hand. Helping Hand is huge because it overcomes its very slow speed to go first and help its opponent, which can be very fast, to deal a huge hit. And you can even go for funny imprisoned strats where you have Hidden Power and Earthquake on your Dusclops to be somewhat of an offensive Dusclops, but also you imprison those moves from your opponent, which sometimes can just deny a team from even doing anything. Next, after Dusclops, we have Wobbuffet. And Wobbuffet obviously is here because it has one niche. However, that niche is pretty huge. It has Shadow Tag, so it is the only mon that can trap every mon in this format. It can stop them from switching out, and it can encore them. So what you do with Wobbuffet, on one hand you can use it on Perish Trap teams, obviously, because it is the only Shadow Tag mon, so you want Wobbuffet on Perish Trap to trap your opponent and let them die to the Perish song, not being able to switch out. On the other hand, we have seen Wobbuffet that wasn't even on a Perish Trap team. It was simply a Wobbuffet by itself, supporting its team by restricting the opponent in their use of their mons, by forcing them to stick with what they send out on the field turn 1. And so what Wobbuffet will do if you are stuck with it on the field is it's gonna encore you, and once you're encored you have to repeat your move and you cannot choose the target. So if you're unlucky, you're gonna target the Wobbuffet and then it hits you back with a mirror coat or a counter, and that's a lot of the time that's just gonna delete your mon right there. So yeah, Wobbuffet is quite funny to use. It is pretty hard to use, but it's also pretty hard to battle against. So yeah, definitely try it out. Next up is Registeel. And Registeel is the second best steel type in the format, and it is kind of like a bulkier version of Metagross. Now it is much less viable because it doesn't have a strong move like Meteor Mash, but it can be more supportive. It can go for Thunder Waves, or it can set up an incredible endgame win con of Amnesia and Iron Defense, coupled with a partner that skill swaps Levitate onto it, such as Gengar or Claydol. So once Registeel has Levitate and also sets up Amnesia and Iron Defense, it becomes impossible to take out, and you need a crit to win, which makes it vulnerable to crits. But even then, a lot of the time the crit wouldn't have dealt that much damage anyways. So yeah, Registeel can be such a scary mon to go up against. So what it then does in the end is just deal damage with Seismic Toss. But yeah, Registeel also has Clear Body, so you can go for full powered explosions that will not be nerfed by Intimidate. Yeah, that's basically what it does. Either it's support with Thunder Wave and Explosion, or it's an endgame win con. Or just a setup win con. Next up we have Hariyama, and Hariyama is another fake out user that has competition from Medicham. Usually in the beginning we used to use Hariyama because of its great bulk and also access to Helping Hand. But then we figured out that Medicham, even though it's much frailer than Hariyama, It doesn't really matter because it doesn't get hit super effectively by a Psychic. So in the end it kind of comes down to the same thing. Both of them will get 2-hit KO'd a lot of the time. So people started using Medicham because it can go for much more damage with Shadow Ball and it's much higher base attack. Not higher base attack, but because of pure power. Still, I do think Hariyama is very nice and it is a bit different from Medicham because yeah, it has Helping Hand and it is much bulkier, so you can go with Thick Fat and you have another Ice Resist and a Fire Resist. So it is much more defensive. Then we have Articuno. Articuno is an interesting mon. It is kind of like a Regice that can take a Meteor Mash more easily, and I think, yeah, and also is EQ immune, but it doesn't hit it doesn't hit as hard as Regice, but it does outspeed Metagross, which is nice for it. So it can always set up a substitute before Metagross hits it with a Meteor Mash. Hey Nicholas, yeah, Breloom being in C tier, listen, I mean Breloom is fun to use, but yeah, it's also very hard to make it work. If you want to change our mind on Breloom, you know, you should join our Discord. You should join the format and try it out yourself. Maybe, you know, maybe you can figure out how to really use Breloom. I'm gonna come to it later though. So right now we're at Articuno. And yeah, Articuno has Ice Beam and Icy Wind a lot of the time. So on one hand it supports the team with Icy Wind, and then it can deal big damage into the Latias and into Zapdos with Ice Beam. I'm not quite sure yet how effective it really is, because I haven't seen it that much. I've used it a little bit. But yeah, it's hard walled by Metagross and Snorlax, just like Regice, which is kind of tough. But yeah, some people really like it, so that's why it's in B tier. Next up is Charizard. And Charizard is basically a little bit faster Moltres, which is not as strong and not as bulky. But on one hand, the speed doesn't really matter, because if you're not 110, if you don't have a base speed of 110 like the Latias and Tauros and Gengar, then you're kind of not that fast. And you know, as long as you're faster than Metagross, that 100 base speed tier doesn't really matter that much. On the other hand, it also doesn't really need that much bulk, because you do want to get into Blaze range to deal a lot of damage with your fire type moves. And so that's why the bulk on Moltres in comparison is not really that much of a game changer. And what Charizard has is also Dragon Claw, which is cool for the Latias. So it can be just a Moltres alternative. Or what it can do, actually, it's the best mon at using Belly Drum. So this might be very funny, because Charizard is not really a strong physical attacker, and it doesn't even have a strong physical stab. Like, its strongest physical attack is Hidden Power Flying. However, because it is EQ immune, and it is the only EQ immune Belly Drum user, it can have a Clefable partner that follow Mies, and then it can set up substitutes that will not be broken unless the user has a niche move like Rock Slide. And then it can set up a substitute and set up Belly Drum, and there have been teams that have been completely destroyed by Belly Drum Charizard. So yeah, do be careful. If you see a Charizard on ladder and you see that it also has a Clefable on the team, you have to respect the Belly Drum Charizard. After Charizard we have Jolteon. Jolteon is one of the fastest mons in the format. Well, one of the second fastest, or third fastest, I guess. It is very fast. It has another strong Thunderbolt. It can go for fast Thunder Waves, or it can just set up substitutes in your face all the time to make sure it stays on the field. It is kind of hard countering Zapdos because of its Volt Absorb ability, which, however, unfortunately does not make it immune to Thunder Wave, so you still can get paralyzed with Jolteon. Which is a shame, but still it can put in work, just because of its speed. It is the most reliable Starmie answer. So if you have a team that really struggles with Starmie, you can definitely consider using Jolteon over Raikou, because you know you will always outspeed the Starmie and you will always pick up the one-hit KO. After Jolteon we have Houndoom, and Houndoom is such a cool mon, and even though it is very frail on the physical side, it does have a great matchup into the top tier threats, which are Metagross and the Latias. It can OHKO the Metagross, and it can live an attack from the Latias and deal like 90% of damage with a crunch. So even though it doesn't pick up the OHKO, it's still a pretty nice matchup because it is immune to their Psychic. And it can even use Will-O-Wisp or even Solar Beam on a Sun team, which means it can also just deal with Swampert. It doesn't see a lot of use, but every time I see it in a battle, it does put in a lot of work. So I'm looking forward to trying it out. Next up is Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl is another very common Choice Band user. Well, it's not very common, but I mean it commonly uses Choice Band. It's just as fast as Jolteon, and it has strong Rock Stab. Well, it has strong rock attacks like Hidden Power Rock for a Zapdos, or it can also use quite effectively Rock Slide. It can really make use of Rock Slide's flinch chance, which can be very annoying to go up against an Aerodactyl and just keep getting flinched by it. And then it also has EQ and Double Edge coupled with Rocket, which is nice. Overall, it never seems to deal enough damage because it is also threatened by a lot of things in return. And so it often seems like it doesn't do enough to be in the team. And it's awkward to play around because you want to EQ with it, but then maybe you don't have a levitating partner next to it anymore. Because it is the flying mon itself, so maybe instead of something else you're using Aerodactyl as your flying mon, but then you cannot really EQ that freely with it. But yeah, it puts in work, and I do like it, and I do think it actually belongs in B+, but that's what we came up with in the end. And next up is Pinsir, and Pinsir is very interesting because we used to believe that Pinsir outclasses Heracross. On one hand, because it is not weak to Psychic, and on the other hand, because it has Hyper Cutter, which makes it immune to Intimidate, which is really cool about Pinsir. But now we kind of figured out that because Pinsir has to rely on HP Bug instead of Mega Horn, it cannot pick up a one-hit KO on the Latias unless it uses Choice Band. But with Choice Band you're not as flexible, so yeah, that makes Pinsir kind of hard to use. But it does have nice options like Earthquake, and it even has Helping Hand. If you decide not to go with Choice Band, you can use Helping Hand. So yeah, that's Pinsir. And then we have Togetic. Togetic is the second best Follow Me user, and Togetic does have a serious case for being used, which is if you want to use a Follow Me user that is immune to Earthquake. For example, let's say you want to set up like a Dragon Dance Tyranitar, then you probably want to use Togetic instead of Clefable because you don't want to be weak to Earthquake on both mons. So yeah, it can see some use, and what it also has over Clefable is Helping Hand. But yeah, in the end, it is also too passive. It is even more passive than Clefable. It cannot even really deal damage. So yeah, it's hard to use, but you can make it work as a Follow Me user. After that, we have Rhydon, which is the second Lightning Rod user in this list. It does get outclassed by Marowak pretty hard in most respects, because it can get OHKO'd by any water type move, or even an HP Grass, which is quite common at this point. And it is not as strong as Marowak. And you don't want to use Choice Band on a Lightning Rod user because you want to abuse Protect and keep them on the field for as long as possible. But what it does have going for it is that it is explosion resistant with its rock typing. On the other hand, that also makes it weak to earthquake. So yeah, it's probably very hard to use. I haven't really used it much myself, but I do know some people like to use it, and yeah, it's in B tier. Next up is Crobat, another very fast Mon, and this is more utility oriented, unlike Aerodactyl and Jolteon. Crobat likes to go for something like Self-Swagger to boost up your Pokemon, or for example, it goes for Haze to get rid of stat drops on your side of the field, like from opposing Intimidates, for example, which can be very nice. And it can go for some fast damage with Shadow Ball or Sludge Bomb. Overall, it seems to sometimes not do enough to really be worth it on the team, but it can put in the work. Sometimes it's like a Rain Dance setter or something. What's nice about it is it also has inner focus, so you cannot flinch it. So that's really cool, being kind of immune to fake out. Yeah, that's basically it for Crobat. Next up we have Politoed, which I didn't actually realize, but yeah, Politoed being in B tier surprises me. I personally ranked it in C+, but it makes sense that it's in B tier because it did reach the finals of Orre Cup 10 OCX, and there it was on a Perish Trap team. And for Perish Trap teams, it is one of the main options as a Perish Song user, because not only can it be a bulky water type, and coupled with Marowak, you can really make use of the bulk because you don't care about Thunderbolts. But it also has Damp, which is like its main niche, is that it has Damp, and it's probably the best user of Damp. And with Damp, it just straight up prevents explosions from even happening. So if you're using Wobbuffet and Politoed, your Politoed keeps your Wobbuffet safe from explosion, because Wobbuffet of course cannot protect. So having Politoed on the field means your Wobbuffet is safe from explosions, and that's something that only Politoed can really do for Perish Trap teams. And that's something really nice about it. And it also still deals quite a lot of damage with its Hydro Pumps. And it can be very annoying with Hypnosis. Yeah. Next we have another green reptile or amphibian thing, which is Sceptile. Another very fast Mon. Sceptile, I don't even know if it was on the last VR or on the first one. It definitely was lower. But now it finds itself in B tier. It did reach top 4 of OCX. And it is very nice to be that fast. As Sceptile is, it can go first and deal damage with Leaf Blade or Crunch, or even Dragon Claw or HP Ice or Thunder Punch. It does have several coverage options. A lot of the time it will not deal enough damage, which is the problem with it. You kind of want to set up with the... what is it called? Its ability. I forget what it's called. Anyways, with its ability that will boost up its grass type moves. But you have to get to low HP. And it's just... you want it to straight out the gate deal damage, and oftentimes it will disappoint you. However, it can also set up Safeguard, which is something that I think we should try out more, because there have been a lot of teams that just spam Thunder Wave, and with a fast Safeguard like from Sceptile, you can put a great stop to these teams, I would think. And of course, if you need a reliable Swampert answer that will pick up the one-hit KO on Swampert, I think Sceptile can be great for that job. After that we have Executor, the first Sun Sweeper. And Executor has some great tools. It has Chlorophyll to boost its speed in the sun. And it has Explosion, which, you know, is the best move in the game. And it coupled with a great attack stat of base 95. And it also has Sleep Powder, which is an amazing move, of course. If you don't want to risk the explosion but still just kind of take out the opponent, At least for a few turns you can sleep powder them. And then it has a strong solar beam and a strong psychic. A lot of the time you want it to be able to set up sun for itself. But yeah, that's the problem. You have to choose which moves you're gonna run. You can even run skill swap with it and skill swap away the chlorophyll to make something else very fast under the sunlight. But yeah, it's the problem with Executor and other Sunsweepers which want to use Solar Beam is that Grass is not the best typing to use in this format offensively, because as you can see in the S tier, S plus and S, all of these mons resist Grass, and Gengar also resists it. So yeah, it's kind of hard to make Sun teams work because of that. So often you need to explode to really pick up these KOs. And outside of the sun it is very slow, so that's also a problem. Next up is Salamence. And I'm a little bit surprised it even made it to B tier. Usually it was in B minus. And you might think, what? Salamence in B minus? What? How could it be that bad? Isn't it a pseudo legendary? Doesn't it have the same attack stat as Metagross? Isn't it really fast with 100 speed? Doesn't it have Dragon Dance to get extremely threatening? And all of this is true, but Salamence just isn't fast enough. And you have Ice Beams or Ice Punches or Hidden Power Ices at every corner of this format. And that's something that really hurts Salamence. It really hurts its viability, because a lot of the time it just cannot stick around on the field to do what it wants to do. So when you use Salamence, you have to play very carefully with it, and that's a problem. But besides setting up Dragon Dance, what it can also do is it can be a special attacker, which is actually really cool because it can deal huge damage to Metagross with Fire Blasts, and it even has Hydro Pump, and of course Dragon Claws deal damage to the Latias. So yeah, it does have use and you can make it work, but it needs a lot of effort to build the right team, I think. Then we go to, alright, so you saw all of this was only the B tier, all of these mons. And after this I'm gonna build a quick team with those B tiers, or maybe I'm gonna do that tomorrow, I will see. But yeah, those are the B tiers. Then we have B minus. So now B minus, starting with Shiftry. Shiftry is usually your first choice for a fake out mon when you want to set up the sunny day, because it also has chlorophyll, so it's immediately going to profit from setting up the sun, and it really helps with the fake out, of course, to set up the sun. And then just like Executor, it has an explosion and solar beam also, but that's about it. It doesn't have sleep powder, and it doesn't have something else like psychic, another really strong attack like that. So yeah, usually you set up, you fake out, and then you're just waiting to explode with it, which is why it's a little bit worse than Executor. But still, on Sun teams, very strong Shiftry. After Shiftry we have Claydol. And Claydol is kind of weird, because on one hand it is great for skill swapping Levitate to enable something, as I said, like Registeel. And you know, it's a ground type, it is immune to Thunderbolt and also immune to Earthquake, and it has its own explosion and Earthquake. It can, for example, even set up screens. But the problem with Claydol is that it is pretty weak, and a lot of the time it is too passive. And if you're dealing with mons that are immune to Earthquake, for example, they're forcing you to explode, which can be bad, because if you explode into their protect, then you did nothing. So yeah, Claydol kind of hard to really put in the work that it wants to, because it's weak and because it relies on explosion to really deal big damage. But this also means that you cannot go full bulk, because then the explosion is not strong enough. And you also want to go fast, you want to outspeed Jolly Metagross. So yeah, overall kind of hard to use, but if you want a skill swap levitator, you're never gonna you can always use Claydol. It's just as viable as Gengar for that role because it has more survivability. After that we have Milotic, and I really don't have much to say about Milotic. It hasn't really seen much use. In theory, it is another bulky water type that can set up Calm Mind, and it is a tiny bit stronger than Suicune. It can also spam Icy Wind to support your team, but yeah, we have barely seen any use with it. It does have Recover, which it does have over Suicune, but overall it's not as bulky, and just in general, setup doesn't seem to be really worth it. So yeah, I think it can definitely put in work, we just haven't really seen it yet. And Suicune largely outclasses it, besides the fact that Milotic can recover. After Milotic we have one of my favorite mons, Electrode. It's such a cool mon. It is the fastest mon besides Ninjask. It has the fastest explosion in the game. And even though it only has a base 50 attack stat, with explosion, with a lot of attack investment, it can deal huge damage. And it can go for a very fast light screen, which is very nice to support your team. And also Thunder Wave, or just deal some damage with Thunderbolt or Thunder. It's kind of hard to use because usually you kind of really relying on explosion for it to put in work, to put in the damage. And yeah, you have to play with it. You have to play very smart when you use Electrode. But I think it is very, very nice to use. It is very fun. After that we have Slaking, and Slaking is Slaking. I really like Slaking and I want it to work. It's just so hard to make it work. I'm still trying to figure out what is the best team for Slaking, what is the best skill swap partner for Slaking. Because yeah, if you use Slaking, I cannot stress this enough, you have to get rid of the Truant ability. You have to skill swap on it. If you don't do that, Slaking is just gonna be sitting around and doing nothing, because every single mon in this format runs Protect. And that is how you should approach this format. This is how you should approach Slaking. If you use it, you make sure you take away its ability, because otherwise it's not going to do anything because of all the protects in this format. You can run it with Choice Band to deal incredible damage, but I think this might not even be the most viable set. I think it might even want to go for like White Herb or Substitute and just stay on the field and dish out hits, even if they're not one-hit KOs, just dish out hits over and over. And the problem with Slaking is, as I said, you have to take away its ability, so you should not bring it in the back unless you bring... Yeah, I guess you also need to bring the Skill Swapper in the back, but usually you want to lead with it and have both Slaking and the Skill Swapper in the lead, and then take away its ability on turn 1. Make sure the Skill Swapper doesn't die. Yeah, there's just a lot of things to keep in mind when using Slaking to not screw yourself over. And it needs a lot of practice, but somehow, someday, I know that it's gonna work. I know we're gonna figure it out. Next up, this was the B- tier, and now finally the last section of this viability rankings is the C tier, and I'm gonna go over these a little bit quicker. First we have the C+ tier with only Jinx in it, which kind of makes sense. Jinx on one hand is very strong. It has strong Ice Beam and Psychic. It also has Fake Out to support. It has Lovely Kiss and Icy Wind. And you can even use Fake Tears with it. The problem, it's very frail. It's gonna die to any physical hit. It is not fast enough. It is too slow. It's always gonna get outsped by Tauros, for example. And yeah, that's basically it for Jinx. If you want to use it, you have to keep in mind it's not going to stick around for very long. But I do think it is on one hand kind of shitty, but also very good because of how strong it is and because of the lovely kiss that it always threatens. After Jinx, we have the C tier, and first of all we have Scizor, which I have used in the past. You can find videos of me using that in XD, and it was really fun to use because it is another explosion resist, and it can go for nice setups with, for example, agility or sword stance, and it is maybe the best user of Endure because it doesn't care about sand, so sand cannot stop its Endure setup. And you can either endure with a Select Berry or a Lychee Berry, and then you have Reversal to deal big damage when you're at 1 HP. And also with Swarm, your Hidden Power Bug or Silver Wind is gonna deal a lot of damage at 1 HP. So yeah, Scizor, really fun to use. I think people should try it out more. But yeah, for now it's in C tier. Now we have Breloom. So let me explain Breloom. It is the same speed tier as Metagross, which is already kind of a problem. So you want to go Jolly Max speed. Of course it is very strong, but Fighting Stab is not the best in this format. A lot of mons resist it, a lot of mons are immune to it. And then you want to run Spore, of course, and you also want to run Mach Punch. Because yeah, of course it's awesome to have a priority move, but in the end the problem is that leaves you with, because you need Protect or Endure, and that leaves you with no coverage move, which means you will be completely walled by something like a Gengar. So yeah, that's kind of Breloom's problem. It's hard to figure out the right moveset, and it is very frail and not fast enough. But Spore is nice, of course. After that we have Miltank, another bulky normal type which can deal some nice damage. Pretty fast, but yeah, not fast enough to be really fast. And just not strong enough to really be worth it for most teams. If you use Miltank, a lot of the time you can just swap it out for Snorlax and have a much better mon. Yeah, it can recover with Milk Drink, but that's basically its niche. It's a normal type that can recover itself with Milk Drink. After that, Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime, one of the most interesting mons in the format because it has both Fake Out and Follow Me. However, it cannot use both at the same time. So when you're going up against it, you don't really know what it's gonna be. So that's already something that's funny about going up against Mr. Mime. Is it gonna be Fake Out or is it gonna be Follow Me? Follow Me is a better move, so a lot of the time it's gonna be that, but yeah, you never know. It's gonna spread like T-Wave, it's gonna go for a Psychic here and there. Overall, it's still pretty frail. It is not super fast, so yeah, it shouldn't be a big problem for your team. But still, it has a lot of utility with Follow Me, so that's why it's in C tier. Next, we have Steelix. I don't have much of an opinion on Steelix. I haven't really used it myself. Supposedly, it's another explosion resist. Steel type, of course, is awesome. And it is a steel type that is immune to Thunderbolt, which means it has a great Zapdos matchup. However, it doesn't seem to be strong enough to really put in the work that people want it to. Once you keep intimidating it, it's going to be a non-factor, basically. It wants to explode, but it also wants to deal huge damage with this explosion. But sometimes the base 85 attack stat is just lacking too much. And also it's very slow. I think it's the same speed as Snorlax, which is never really a good sign if you're not a mon that is as good overall as Snorlax. And it doesn't really have a nice stab option because it has to rely on Iron Tail. Of course it has Earthquake, but for anything that is immune to Earthquake it has to use either Iron Tail or I don't know. I don't even know what else. Maybe you can use Double Edge. I guess it has Rock Hat. And then we have Quagsire. Quagsire is the second damp mon in this list. And it is the only damp mon that is immune to electric, which is kind of that is basically its niche. It has damp and also a ground type. So, hey Cherry, how you doing? Great to finally see you on my stream. Yeah, we're almost done with the viability rankings, but right now I'm at Quagsire in the C tier. So, yeah, Quagsire has damp and ground typing, which is basically all that it has. It has stab earthquake, which, you know, can deal some damage. But if you're really considering using Quagsire, you know, maybe think about it again, because I think a lot of the time you actually just want to use Swampert instead. Of course, explosions are scary and it's nice to know if they cannot explode in front of you, but as soon as you understand how the format works and you can predict their explosions, it's better to just have a Swampert, which is just a great mon overall, and just protect with the Swampert when you sense an explosion coming. Otherwise, still Quagsire can be used because of damp, of course. And I guess it can also Icy Wind, just like Swampert. Yeah, basically kind of like a mini Swampert with damp. Next up is Ninjask. Ninjask is one of the most unique mons in the format. Something that only Ninjask can achieve is to one-hit KO the Latias before they can move, because it outspeeds them, and with a choice band it can pick up the one-hit KO without using, for example, an explosion like Electrode would. So yeah, that's something that Ninjask can do, or so it's either CB Ninjask, which is fun to use but not very reliable, because it is so frail, obviously, and is not quite strong enough. Or you can set up sword stances while you get the speed boosts, and then baton pass to a very scary mon with those boosts, like Metagross or Marowak, for example. Yeah, that is what Ninjask does. It can be used, however, pretty effectively if you know how to use it. Machamp is next, and as I mentioned before, Machamp's claim to fame is being the only mon that can OHKO Snorlax without a choice band and without an explosion. But I have seen very little use of Machamp, and it's still kind of hard to me to really assess how viable it really is. But yeah, that's Machamp for you. It can... What's funny about Machamp is it also has Encore, so that's something I was wondering if you can make some good use of Encore with it. That's something that I would like to explore when I use it. But anyways, most of the time you just want to deal some damage with it. And Low Kick is, to be fair, Low Kick is a really nice move because you hit Snorlax and Metagross for big damage because they're so heavy. After Machamp we have Shedinja. Shedinja, yeah, I mean, you know Shedinja, it's the mon that can only be taken out with a super effective hit. And a lot of the time it's not going to do anything because you don't know if your opponent has a super effective hit. Maybe a Metagross can have hidden power Rock, for example. Or a Lati can have hidden power Fire. Or, you know, like I ran Drill Peck on Zapdos. So even that is not always a safe matchup. But if you're playing open team sheet like we do in our Orre Cups, then you can definitely put a Shedinja on your team to have a win con against mons that just don't have, against teams that just don't have enough ways to deal with it. So yeah, Shedinja. After Shedinja we have Persian, which is my favorite mon, and I wish it could be higher, but it definitely belongs here in the C tier. It is one of the fastest fake out users with Sneasel, and it does get stab on the fake out, which is pretty nice. And it does outspeed the Latias and Tauros and Gengar. So you can deal some nice chip damage with like Double Edge or Shadow Ball. You can be very annoying with Hypnosis, but that's just, for me, I don't know, it's not reliable enough. And it has Limber, which is pretty cool because you cannot be paralyzed, so you're always going to be fast unless they get off an Icy Wind. but you can run like White Herb on it for that. So yeah, that's Persian. Next up we have, so yeah, Persian can like enable certain strats with Fake Out, right? Or it can swagger its partner, for example. Next up we have Armaldo. Armaldo has seen pretty little use so far, and I was thinking about it recently because it does have a really nice Lati matchup. With a Choice Band you can one-hit KO Latis with Hidden Power Bug, and it does have a pretty funny move in Rock Blast to potentially one-hit KO Zapdos. It does have Earthquake and Brick Break, and it resists Explosion. And Shell Armor, so it cannot get hit. So for example, if you put a lot of bulk into it, you can always live Meteor Mash, for example. So yeah, definitely I want to see Armaldo being used more. I think it can work even better. It could even be like C+ or B-, or you know, who knows how high it can get. And next up we have Blaziken, the last C tier. And Blaziken is it's so disappointing because on one hand you really hope Blaziken can work, and on paper it has a great Metagross matchup and a great Snorlax matchup. But then it's kind of slow, and it's just too frail to really ever work the way you want it to. Because there are Earthquakes everywhere, there are Psychics and Hydro Pumps and all these moves that will just put a stop to it immediately before it can do anything. Theoretically, you can use Endure Select Blaziken with Reversal and a Blaze-powered Fire Blast, for example. It's just Endure strats never really seem to work that well because there's a lot of Thunder Wave and Icy Wind, for example. However, if you want to try it out and if you want to just wreck some people with a Blaziken, that's something you can try. That's probably the only strat that I would use for Blaziken, the Endure strat. And finally we have the C- tier. First is Poliwrath. Honestly, Poliwrath kind of sucks. It also has Damp, and it has a Fighting type, which is more to its detriment than to its benefit because it gets weak to Psychic. And its Brick Break just doesn't deal enough damage, you know. It can Icy Wind, it can Hypnosis, just like Politoed. But yeah, you're probably better off using Politoed if you want to use a Damp Mon like Poliwrath. Then we have Dugong. Kind of low on this list, honestly, but yeah, it hasn't really seen much usage recently. What it has going for it is a Fake Out. It has the same speed tier as Metagross, and it has Encore, and it is quite bulky. What it doesn't have is Hydro Pump, which is pretty sad. And yeah, Dugong just seems too passive, and even though it's bulky, often it doesn't seem bulky enough. Yeah, that's my cat. That's Chili. Are you enjoying your time in the driver's seat? Yeah, say something to the fans. Alright. Yeah, so Dugong, kind of passive, kind of not bulky enough, not fast enough to really make good use of Encore. But it does have all these tools, so it can definitely put in work on the right team. Next up is Flygon. Now, Flygon for me belongs really to the bottom of this list because it has the same problem as Salamence. It is 4 times weak to one of the most common moves in the format. Ice Beam, you know, Ice Punch and Hidden Power Ice. It does have a strong Earthquake, Stab Earthquake. And it does have an EQ immunity itself. But unlike Salamence, which at least has Intimidate, which means even if Salamence doesn't get a hit off, it can do something with Intimidate. But Flygon, if it doesn't get a hit off, it just doesn't do anything. And it also has a very bad matchup into Zapdos, unfortunately. Yeah. Really, Flygon Such a sad mon. I hope at some point there can be a team with it where it can put in work, but so far I haven't seen it put in work. After Flygon we have Venusaur. I have played once against Venusaur. I have seen somebody else's battles with Venusaur. So I have seen that it can put in work with Sleep Powder. It can set up like a Leech Seed. It can be a great answer for Swampert, of course. It can live a Psychic, which is nice, which means you can use it even though it's weak to Psychic. But yeah, overall, I'm not sure if you're not better off maybe using a different grass type if you want to use Venusaur. But honestly, it doesn't seem too bad. So yeah, I think we're gonna see more of Venusaur and maybe it's gonna rise a bit in the ranks. Next up we have Dugtrio, and I have been using Dugtrio very recently. And yeah, we still, honestly, I think we're underestimating Dugtrio a little bit. So initially we were not using Dugtrio because it is so frail, but Arena Trap is actually such a huge tool to have. So if you lead Dugtrio and your opponent leads Metagross, you can really deal with that Metagross right there. They cannot switch it out, and I think that's huge. So yeah, Arena Trap definitely gives it a pretty decent niche, and I'm gonna use it more. And I do think it belongs into something like the C+ tier actually, and hopefully we're gonna see that change in the future. And honestly, with Stab Earthquake, even though it's only base 80 attack in Gen 3, it does deal quite a lot of damage. Why are you biting me? Huh? What's the problem? Oh, are you hungry? Oh. Let me explain these mons, or do you want to explain? Do you want to explain what's nice about Dugtrio? Okay. Okay, so that was Dugtrio. Definitely has some use. Next up, for me the biggest understatement in this whole viability ranking is Jumpluff. Of course you might think, oh, but Jumpluff is also 4 times weak to ice, just like Salamence and Flygon. However, Jumpluff actually speed ties the Latias and Tauros and Gengar, so a lot of the time you're not guaranteed to get off the Ice Beam before it can Sleep Powder you. And yes, sleep being so strong in Gen 3, lasting up to 5 turns, can really destroy teams. Even with the Sleep Claws that we have. And besides Sleep Powder, it also has Encore. So it has like 2 of the best status moves that you can have in this format, and it is very fast. The problem with it, of course, is it doesn't really deal damage. So I'm not even sure if you want to run an attacking move on it, because it also has Helping Hand, which is also huge. So yeah, it's kind of hard to use it because of how passive it can be if it cannot support its team anymore. Like if it's left by itself, it's always gonna lose. But it definitely does not belong in C- tier. It belongs into one of the B tiers, in my opinion. And then the last one on the list, we have Swallow. And Swallow is basically just a super fast guts mon. It can have like a partner Crobat Toxic into it and then go for huge damage with Facade. And that's basically what Swallow can do. And I've tried it before, it was very fun to use. I'm gonna try it again. But I do understand why it's in C-, because as long as your opponent has like Intimidate or a Gengar, or yeah, also with Metagross, you're really limiting Swallow's options of doing things. However, if you do get off these big facades, then powered also with a Choice Band, for example, then you can deal huge damage. Too bad Swallow is so frail and dies to 1 hit. Anyways, so this was the viability ranking. After the next standard Orre Cup, we're gonna update it. So we will always do updates on these. Right now, this is the state of the metagame, and I do think it reflects the metagame pretty well. Even though a lot of people don't like that Latios and Latias are not in the same tier, which I agree with, they should be, they are basically equal. But anyways, these are the viable mons in the format. I do think there are two mons that I can immediately think of that are missing. One is Lapras, which can use Perish Song and Heal Bell. And the other one is Sableye, a ghost type which has Fake Out and Helping Hand. So yeah, these mons should definitely be on this list, and I will make sure they're on this list next time when we do the next update. But yeah, this was it. I hope this gave you a nice overview of all the mons in the format. I hope you understand why they are where they are. And if you have any questions, you know, ask in the comments and I will try to explain every question you have about the viability of a certain mon in this format.